Robert Duvall was standing in the middle of a Buenos Aires tango studio when the instructor stopped the music and told him, in front of 30 students, that he had no sense of rhythm and should consider a different hobby. What happened over the next 4 weeks left the entire school speechless. It was a Monday evening in September 1999, and the Estudio Milonga on Avenida Corrientes in the San Telmo neighborhood of Buenos Aires was 40 minutes into its intermediate level class when the instructor, a 34-year-old woman named Valentina Ríos, stopped the music for the third time in the same hour. This was not unusual in Buenos Aires, where tango is not a performance, but a conversation, a city-wide, decades-long conversation conducted in close embrace between people who may not share a language, but share a music. The Estudio Milonga had been operating in the same ground floor space since 1971, when Valentina's mother had opened it after a decade of dancing professionally in Europe. The floors were original hardwood, dark and worn smooth by 40 years of feet. The mirrors along one wall were slightly warped with age, giving the room a quality that newer studios with better glass didn't have, a sense that the reflections in them were memories as much as images. This was not unusual. Valentina stopped the music when something needed to be corrected, and something always needed to be corrected in an intermediate class. What was unusual was the particular student she was stopping it for. He was standing near the back of the studio, a lean, unhurried man in his late 60s, silver-white hair neatly combed, wearing a plain dark jacket and the kind of plain-toed shoes that serious tango students eventually abandon in favor of proper dance footwear, and that beginners almost universally arrive in. The decision to come to Buenos Aires had not been, by Duvall's own later account, a professional one. He was not preparing for a role, he was not researching a project. He had seen a documentary about the tango in a hotel room in New York and felt, with the specific certainty of someone who has spent 50 years trusting his instincts about what is worth paying close attention to, that this was something he needed to understand from the inside rather than the outside. He had flown to Buenos Aires 2 weeks later, found an apartment in Palermo for the month, and enrolled in the nearest studio. He had enrolled 3 weeks earlier under the name Robert Davis, had told the front desk he was an American on an extended stay in Buenos Aires, and had been attending every class available to him with a consistency and a seriousness that Valentina had noted and respected, even as the consistency of his errors had begun to test her professional patience in ways she was not accustomed to. The man could not find the beat. He was aware of this. He did not pretend otherwise, did not perform a confidence he didn't have, or cover the gap between what he was doing and what the music required with the kind of social deflection that self-conscious students sometimes use to make their errors smaller than they are. He was simply, straightforwardly, consistently wrong about where the beat was, and he came back to every class and was wrong again, and took the corrections without defense and came back the following day. This was not, in Valentina's experience, an unusual problem in beginners. The tango beat is not where most bodies expect it to be, and the process of finding it is one that takes different students different amounts of time. Some find it in the first week, some take a month. A few never find it at all, which is a fact of teaching that Valentina had learned to accept without judgment, though not without frustration. What frustrated her about this particular student was not that he couldn't find the beat. It was that he was clearly not a man who was unaware of his body. His posture was good. His frame, when he remembered to hold it, was strong. His attention during demonstrations was complete and focused. He understood what he was being shown. And then the music started, and something between the understanding and the doing failed to connect, and he was half a beat behind, and then a full beat behind, and then somewhere entirely his own. She had corrected this 6 times in 3 weeks. On the Monday evening in September, she corrected it a 7th time, and something in the gap between what she had explained and what she was watching gave way. She stopped the music. "Senor Davis," she said, in the clear, carrying voice that a teacher uses when the correction is intended to be heard by the room as well as the student. "You have been in this class for 3 weeks. I've explained the rhythm to you 7 times. In that time, every other student in this room has found it. You have not." She paused. "I say this with respect. Perhaps the tango is not your form. Perhaps you would be more comfortable with something that asks less of the body's natural sense of time. 30 students were quiet. The man she knew as Robert Davis looked at her for a moment. "Can we try the combination again?" he said. Valentina looked at him. In 30 students' worth of reactions to public correction, embarrassment, defensiveness, wounded dignity, the occasional tears, she had not often encountered this particular response, which was neither deflection nor performance, but simply a man asking to continue working. She started the music again. He was still half a beat behind. But there was something different in the attempt, a quality of attention in his body that had not been there before, a willingness to be wrong in the specific way that precedes being less wrong. And Valentina, who had been teaching long enough to recognize the difference between a student who is failing and a student who is learning, noted it and said nothing. He came back the next morning. The Estudio Milonga offered a morning practice session 3 times a week, an open floor, no instruction, just music, and the opportunity to work on whatever needed working. Most intermediate students attended once a week. A few came twice. The man who had enrolled as Robert Davis began attending every session. By the end of the 3rd week, he was attending the morning practice, the intermediate class, and a private lesson on Friday afternoons that he had booked without telling anyone, in which he and Valentina worked for 90 minutes on nothing except the specific problem of finding the beat. Valentina had taught private lessons for 11 years. She had taught beginners, professionals, actors preparing for film roles, politicians who wanted to look competent at state dinners, and a former world champion who was trying to rebuild a technique that had calcified into habit. She had not taught anyone quite like this. He asked questions that were not beginner questions, not about technique. His technique remained, in some areas, genuinely problematic, but about the music itself, about the history of the rhythmic structure of the tango, about why the beat sat where it sat and what it was trying to do there, about the relationship between the music and the silence between the notes. These were the questions of someone who was approaching the problem from a direction that most students never thought to try. Not trying to find the beat by drilling the body, but trying to understand it well enough that the body could find it on its own. In the 4th week, something changed. Valentina had not been expecting it. She had, if she was honest with herself, begun to revise her assessment of what was possible for this particular student, not with unkindness, but with the pragmatic realism that 11 years of teaching had given her about the difference between students who were moving toward a thing and students who were moving around it. She'd begun to think he was the second kind. She was wrong. It happened during a Thursday morning practice session. Valentina was working with another student at the far end of the studio when she became aware, without being able to immediately identify why, that something in the room's sound had shifted. She looked toward the back of the floor. The man who had enrolled as Robert Davis was dancing. Not correctly. There were still problems in his technique that would take months to address. But he was in the music. The beat that had eluded him for 4 weeks had been found, or had found him, in the particular way that these things happen, not as a decision, but as a sudden physical understanding of something that had been explained from the outside for so long that the body had finally internalized it. He was half a measure behind, no longer. He was there. Valentina watched him for the length of the song without saying anything. The other student she had been working with had also stopped and was watching, though she would not have been able to say exactly when she stopped her own practice and turned toward the back of the floor. There was something in the quality of what was happening there that altered the room, not dramatically, not in any way that would have been visible to someone walking in off the street, but in the particular way that a room changes when something that has been almost right for a long time becomes, without announcement, right. The music ran to its end. The needle reached the edge of the record. The room was quiet. Valentina watched him for the length of the song without saying anything. When the music stopped, she crossed the studio floor. "Senor Davis," she said. He looked at her. "You found it," she said. He nodded once. He was breathing harder than the exertion required, the breath of someone who has been working toward something for a long time and has just arrived. "I think I needed to understand why it was there before my body would agree to be there with it." Valentina looked at him for a long moment. "You're not a retired tourist," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," he said. She waited. He told her his name. Valentina Ríos had been born in Buenos Aires, had grown up going to the cinema, and had seen The Godfather at the age of 15 in a theater on Duvall with her father, who had told her afterward that the man who played Tom Hagen was the finest actor working in American film. She had seen Tender Mercies on a Tuesday afternoon in 1984 alone, and had sat in the theater for 20 minutes after it ended. She stood in her studio on a Thursday morning in Buenos Aires in September 1999 and looked at Robert Duvall. Later, when people asked her what that moment was like, she described it in a way that surprised them. She did not describe surprise exactly or awe exactly, or even the particular disorientation of learning that the student who had been frustrating her for 4 weeks was one of the most decorated actors in the history of American cinema. What she described was a kind of retroactive clarity, the sense of understanding all at once why a man she had taken for a retired tourist with 2 left feet had asked the questions he asked, had come back every morning, had booked the Friday private lessons, had needed to understand the why before the body would follow. She stood in her studio on a Thursday morning and looked at Robert Duvall. "I told you to find a different hobby," she said. "You were right to tell me," he said. "It made me work harder." She was quiet for a moment. "You still have problems with your frame in the close embrace," she said. "I know," he said. "Can we work on that Friday?" They worked on it Friday. Robert Duvall spent 6 weeks total in Buenos Aires that September and October. He attended the Estudio Milonga almost every day. He never became a technically accomplished tango dancer. Valentina would be the first to say so and has said so in interviews, always with the qualifier that technical accomplishment was not what he had come for. What he came for, and what he found, was something she has described as a quality of presence in the dance that most technically accomplished students spend years trying to manufacture, and that he arrived at by a route she had never seen a student take before. Robert Duvall left Buenos Aires in the second week of October. He said goodbye to Valentina at the end of his last Friday lesson, shook her hand with the same firm directness with which he shook everyone's hand, and told her the 6 weeks had been among the most honestly instructive of his life. She thanked him for his patience with her correction on the first Monday. He said the correction was the most useful thing anyone had said to him in years. He sent her a letter from Los Angeles 6 weeks after he returned. It was 3 sentences. He thanked her for the correction on the first Monday. He said it was the most useful thing anyone had said to him in a long time. He said he was still working on the close embrace. The letter is framed on the wall of the Estudio Milonga's reception area, beneath a photograph of Valentina's mother dancing in Paris in 1963. Because Valentina decided that it belonged in the company of things the studio was proud of. Most students who ask about it are told it is from a former student who found his rhythm late. A few of them press for more detail. Valentina tells them what she tells everyone, that the student was told to consider a different hobby and came back the next morning, and the morning after that for 4 weeks, until the music and the body finally reached an agreement. She tells them this because it is the part of the story that matters most to her as a teacher. The name, she says, is secondary. Most students who ask about it are told it is from a former student who found his rhythm late. This is not inaccurate. If this story reminded you that the most important corrections are the ones we return to rather than retreat from, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell us in the comments about a time someone told you to quit and you came back anyway. More stories about the real character behind Hollywood's greatest legends are on the way every week.